If you have ever walked past the magistrate court on Lagos Island on any given Monday morning, you might have noticed a short, portly man in a rumpled black suit that looked like it had survived 2 world wars, 3 military coups, and at least 1 flood. His wig, that symbol of legal authority borrowed from the British, sat permanently crooked on his head, leaning left at an angle that suggested it too had given up on him. His briefcase, a battered brown leather thing held together by faith, rubber bands, and what appeared to be scotch tape, swung with misplaced confidence as he strutted toward the courtroom doors. This was Barrister Chukwuemeka Obinna Okonkwo, LLB Honours, barely. BL, passed on the 4th attempt, Esquire. Known in the corridors of Lagos legal circles in hushed tones and barely suppressed laughter as Double Trouble. Some said the name came from the fact that if you hired him, you had double the trouble. The trouble you already had, plus the new trouble he would add. Others said it was because whenever Double Trouble entered a courtroom, 2 people were guaranteed to suffer. The opposing party's lawyer from suppressed laughter and his own client from everything else. Barrister Okonkwo had been practicing law in Lagos for 11 years. In those 11 years, he had handled no fewer than 237 cases. He had lost 237 cases. Some people call this consistency. His only client who had ever returned for his second matter, a remarkably stubborn pepper soup seller from Apapa named Mama Tunde, once described his services this way: "At least he get confidence. Even when him they lose, he lose with style." His office was located on the 3rd floor of a building on Broad Street that smelled permanently of mold and ambition. A sign outside his door read, "Okonkwo and Associates, Legal Practitioners and Consultants." The associates were fictional. The consultants was aspirational. The sign itself had a crack down the middle that made it look like even the lettering was trying to separate from the man's name. His fee structure was, to put it charitably, democratic. Where a proper senior advocate might charge 500,000 naira for a retainer, Double Trouble charged between 5,000 and 20,000 naira, depending on how hungry he was that week. This pricing had earned him a steady stream of clients: market women, bus drivers, petty traders, and small-time hustlers who could not afford anybody better and were too desperate to ask too many questions. The trouble was, cheap or not, Double Trouble always found a spectacular new way to lose. On a humid Tuesday morning in October, a man named Babarisi walked into Barrister Okonkwo's office looking like a man who had not slept in 3 days. He hadn't. His neighbor, one Mr. Festus Abidogun, had reportedly stolen his prized Yoruba goat, a magnificent, full-bearded creature named Alabarago that Babarisi had raised from infancy and intended to sell at a very favorable price during Salah. "Barrister," Babarisi said, sitting in the plastic chair across from the desk, "I want justice. That man take my goat, my own goat where I dey feed since he be pikin." Double Trouble leaned back in his chair with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. He pressed his fingers together and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he said, "How much the goat cost?" 45,000 naira. He picked up a pen and wrote something down. Babarisi craned his neck and saw that it said, "Goat, stolen, neighbor, 45K. I will take this case. My fee is 10,000 naira. Babarisi blinked. "That is all. I am a man of the people." 3 weeks later, they appeared before Magistrate Adebayo, a heavy-set woman with the patience of someone who had spent 20 years watching lawyers make fools of themselves. She had a particular weariness that came over her face whenever Barrister Okonkwo appeared.
The way a person's face changes when they hear a familiar but unwelcome song. The opposing counsel, a sleek young lawyer from a firm on Victoria Island, presented his case cleanly. His client, Mr. Abidogun, had purchased the goat from a trader at Mile 12 Market. He had receipts, he had witnesses, he had a very well-prepared written address. Then Double Trouble rose. "My lord," he began, adjusting his crooked wig, "the facts before this court are simple. My client's goat, named Alabarago, a fine animal, very fine, was taken by the defendant under the cover of the night, like a common thief, like a thief where they operate under midnight." Magistrate Adebayo looked up. "Counsel, please address this court in proper English." "Yes, my lord. I was merely illustrating the gravity, the midnightness of the act." He cleared his throat. "Now, my client has raised this goat since it was a small goat, a baby goat, a tiny innocent goat. Counsel, the age of the goat is not in dispute." "My lord, it is very much in dispute because this goat," he pointed dramatically at the cage at the back of the courtroom where the goat in question stood chewing something philosophically. "This goat has a birthmark, a very specific birthmark on its left buttock." The courtroom went quiet. The magistrate leaned forward. "And what is the significance of this birthmark?" "My lord, my client can identify this birthmark. Therefore, the goat is his." "Has your client examined the animal to confirm the birthmark is present?" Double Trouble turned to his client and whispered loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. "You sure say the goat get birthmark for Yansh?" Babarisi stared at him. "I never say that." "You never say that?" "I never say anything about any birthmark." "Ah!" Double Trouble straightened up and turned to the magistrate. "My lord, I withdraw the birthmark submission." The young Victoria Island lawyer was biting the inside of his cheek very hard. "My lord," Double Trouble continued, undeterred, "my new submission is this. The goat's name is Alabarago. We can call the goat. If the goat answers to Babarisi and not to the defendant, that proves ownership." Magistrate Adebayo stared at him. "You want to call a goat as a witness?" "Not as a witness, my lord, as a participant in identification proceedings." There was a sound at the back of the courtroom that might have been someone choking or laughing or both. The magistrate removed her glasses, cleaned them, replaced them, and looked at the lawyer again as if hoping he had transformed into someone else. "Counsel, I am going to give you one more opportunity to make a coherent legal argument." Double Trouble nodded vigorously. He shuffled through his papers, pulled out a page, studied it, and then, in what appeared to be a sudden burst of inspiration, turned to Mr. Abidogun himself, who sat quietly beside his lawyer. "You," he pointed, "did you steal this goat?" The opposing counsel shot to his feet. "Objection, my lord. Counsel cannot cross-examine my client without—" "I withdraw the question," Double Trouble said immediately. Then half a second later, "But did you?" The magistrate ruled in favor of Mr. Abidogun. Babarisi walked out of the courtroom without his goat and without his 10,000 naira. He stood on the steps of the court, staring at the traffic on Lagos Island, and said quietly, "I should have collected the goat myself." Double Trouble appeared beside him, straightening his wig. "My brother, we go appeal." "With what money?" "We go work something out." Babarisi walked away. Double Trouble shouted after him, "In no finish, justice no dey die."
Mama Nkechi was 54 years old, sold tomatoes at Oyimbo Market, and had been fighting her landlord for non-refund of her 2-year rent deposit for going on 18 months. She had heard of Barrister Okonkwo from her friend Iyabasira, who had used him once and described the experience as like entering one chance bus, you pray throughout. Nevertheless, Mama Nkechi went to his office, sat down,
listened to his prices, and decided that since 10,000 naira was less than what she would lose if she did nothing, she would take the risk. The hearing was at the rent tribunal in Yaba. Double Trouble arrived 20 minutes late, sweating and carrying a folder of documents that he had clearly assembled that morning in a hurry. Some pages were upside down. He did not know this. The tribunal chairman, a retired civil servant named Mr. Olariwaju, who had the demeanor of a man on the permanent edge of exhaustion, looked up when Double Trouble burst through the door. "Counsel, you are late." "My lord, chairman, sir, there was go-slow on Third Mainland. Terrible thing. You know how Lagos go-slow be." He settled into his seat, opened his folder, and several papers fell out and slid under the table. He reached for them, bumped his head on the table surface coming back up, and adjusted his wig, which had been knocked further sideways. "Are you all right, counsel?" "Perfectly fine, chairman. Perfectly fine." The landlord's representative, a no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Fadaunsi, who charged proper rates and wore a suit that had actually been ironed, presented a clean case. The tenancy agreement stipulated that deposit would be forfeited if the tenant violated Clause 7B. She claimed Mama Nkechi had violated Clause 7B by subletting part of the apartment without consent. Mama Nkechi leaned over to Double Trouble and whispered, "I never sublet anything. That clause is lie." I know, Double Trouble whispered back, loud enough for Mrs. Fadaunsi to hear. She wrote something on her notepad. When it was Double Trouble's turn, he stood up with all the confidence of a man who did not know how bad things were about to get. "Chairman, the position of my client is simple. She never, at any point, under any roof, in any building in this Lagos, or any Lagos in this world, sublet anything to anybody. The allegation is falsehood.